Many battles of the Plains Indian Wars demonstrate the bravery, courage, and fortitude of both sides of the conflict. One such battle occurred from September 17th to September 25th, 1868, in the northeast corner of Colorado. This was the Battle of Beecher's Island. Hi, I am at the site of the Battle of Beecher's Island. Now, contrary to what a lot of people think, the battles between Indians and soldiers out here on the western frontier were not large affairs. But here at Beecher's Island, approximately 60 soldiers were surrounded by thousands of Cheyenne, principally Cheyenne, but also some Arapaho and Sioux Indians. With the ending of the Civil War, more settlers moved into and traveled across the Great Plains, especially the areas of western Kansas and eastern Colorado. These settlers were lured to the area by free land, construction of the railroad, and newly discovered gold fields in Colorado and Montana. The Plains tribes, the Arapaho, Cheyenne, Kiowa, and Lakota, resented the incursion of these settlers, railroad workers, miners, and travelers. The conflict intensified with the massacre of Arapaho and Cheyenne by Colorado soldiers at Sand Creek in 1864. The warriors of these tribes made the areas between the Arkansas and Platte rivers extremely dangerous. The Army was being called more and more to provide protection for the people traveling and settling in the area. General Sheridan came up with a novel idea for combating the hostile tribes. He instructed his aide, Major George Forsyth, to organize a detachment of scouts made up of experienced and hardy frontiersmen to search for the hostile Indians using their tactics. Along with himself and his executive officer, Lieutenant Frederick Beecher, both Civil War veterans, they selected 48 men. Armed with Spencer repeating rifles, the detachment headed west from central Kansas to Fort Wallace at the western end of the state. On 15 September, Forsyth was told that a raiding party of around 25 braves had attacked a freighter's train east of Fort Wallace. The troop picked up the raiders' trail and followed it near the Colorado border. The trail indicated that the scouts were far outnumbered. Nevertheless, Forsyth pressed on. On the evening of the 16th, the scouts camped along the south side of the Arikara River, unaware they were near a large encampment of Lakota and Cheyenne dog soldiers, led by a highly acclaimed warrior, Roman Nose. Roman Nose was not a chief, but he was a leader and respected warrior in the Dog Soldier Society, the most feared of the Cheyenne warrior societies. He was a tall man, over 6 foot, with a prominent aquiline nose, which is why the whites called him Roman Nose. He was very spiritual and considered by his fellow warriors to be invincible in battle. A group of Lakota scouts discovered Forsyth's men and alerted the camp. The warriors planned a surprise attack for the next day. This plan failed when a group of young braves attempting to capture the horses woke the scouts, starting the battle on the morning of the 17th. Soon, between 200 to 1,000 warriors were poised on the bluffs above the camp. The surprise attack was driven back, and Forsyth ordered his men to deploy on an island in the middle of the river and form a defensive perimeter. The scouts quickly reached the island, tied the horses to bushes, and began to dig rifle pits with what tools they could find: cups, spoons, knives, and plates. The first charge was made by a few dozen warriors, charging down the hillside and along both sides of the river. Their attack was broken by the rapid fire of the scouts' Spencer rifles. Both sides suffered casualties. Lieutenant Beecher and 3 other scouts were killed. The doctor was mortally wounded, and Forsyth received 3 wounds. With the charge failing, the Cheyenne braves dismounted and fired at the scouts from the tall grass on both sides of the river, killing all of their horses. Roman Nose had not participated in the early fighting. He had inadvertently broken one of his taboos. He believed that as long as he did not shake hands with a white man or eat anything touched by iron, he would not die in battle. The previous evening, however, he had inadvertently eaten bread cooked with an iron fork. He believed if he joined the fight, he would die. Several Cheyenne and Sioux leaders begged him to lead a charge, arguing that he would inspire the other warriors and lead them to victory. Still, he refused until one chief called him a coward. Resigning himself to his fate, Roman Nose prepared for battle. He would lead the charge on the island. The warriors had gathered on the mostly dry riverbed south of the island. Sharpshooters hid in the tall grass along the banks opposite the island in an effort to keep the scouts down as the mounted warriors charged into the defenders. This is a display of the Battle of Beecher's Island. The island sits at letter B, and then you can see in letters E, F, and C where the Indians came in, the Cheyenne, and attacked the troops there on the island. Just at the edge of the island, the scouts fired from the rifle pits, and sheets of lead and fire hit the charging warriors. Many brave Indians fell from their ponies. On they still came. Another volley brought down more warriors. Volley after volley had frightening effect. Roman Nose was hit and fell into the bush alongside the bank, and the line broke and scattered in different directions away from the island. Forsyth turned anxiously to his chief scout, Grover. "Can they do any better than that?" he asked. "I have been on these plains, boy and man, for 20 years, and I have never saw anything like it," answered the scout. "Then we have got them," Forsyth replied. The charge had failed, but the battle continued. Roman Nose was lying in the bush when he was found by Cheyenne braves and carried to a high ground above the riverbed. That evening he died. The Cheyenne were disheartened by the loss of Roman Nose, and none were up for another charge. But they did not withdraw. The battle now became a siege. The Indians continued sniping at the men on the island. By the end of the day, the scouts had lost in killed or wounded about 20 men, and all the horses were dead. They had plenty of ammunition, could get some water, but had no food or medical supplies. The scouts were in a desperate situation. That evening, Forsyth asked for volunteers to go to Fort Wallace for help. He selected two men, 19-year-old Jack Stillwell and an older, experienced French Canadian, Pierre Trudeau. The two had to travel over 70 miles on foot. They crept from the island through the Indians. They crawled for 3 miles. The next 5 days they traveled at night and hid during the day. At one point they needed to hide in a buffalo carcass to prevent detection. In their hiding place they found another danger, a rattlesnake. Killing the snake could make enough noise to alert the Indians, but the rattling itself could attract attention. Stillwell drove off the snake by spitting tobacco juice into its face. With its mouth and eyes stinging from the tobacco juice, the rattlesnake slithered away. On the island fortress, the surrounded scouts were in a miserable condition. The days were hot and the nights cold. Indians hid in the tall grass on the bank, taking pot shots at any man who exposed himself. Their only food was the flesh of the rotting horses, and the stench of the animals made the air on the island foul and full of flies. The next night, two more men slipped away from the island, but returned unable to get through the Indian lines. Not knowing what had happened to Stillwell and Trudeau, the following night, two other scouts, John Donovan and Allison Pinley, left the island. That night, Stillwell and Trudeau had escaped their buffalo carcass hideout and pressed on to Fort Wallace, walking all night. Late in the morning, they came across a wagon road and two troopers of the 10th Cavalry, who brought them to Fort Wallace. From the fort, Stillwell and Trudeau joined a relief force. Donovan and Finley also reached the fort, and the next day, Donovan, with 5 volunteers, headed back to the battle site. On his way, he encountered Colonel Carpenter with a company of the 10th Cavalry. About 10 o'clock on the 25th, lookouts on the island saw Colonel Carpenter and his relief force approaching. Forsyth, seeing Carpenter, greeted him by saying, "Welcome to Beecher's Island." The once nameless little sandbar on the Rickaree River now had an immortal name. The scouts had lost 6 men. Forsyth estimated that 35 Sioux and Cheyenne had been killed. From interviews compiled long afterwards, it was reported only 9 Indians were killed. In 1905, a monument was erected on the island. The monument stood until a flood washed the monument as well as the island away in 1935. Not much remains of the Beecher Island battlefield today. A monument was erected in 1976 to commemorate Forsyth and his men. Unfortunately, there is nothing to commemorate Roman Nose and the sacrifice the Cheyenne and Sioux warriors made on this field. The visitor today can walk a trail named in honor of Roman Nose across the battle area. And if you listen carefully, you can hear the noise of the conflict.